Yeah.
Okay, well, good evening, everybody. My name's Bob Sewell. I'm president of the Houston Archaeological Society, and welcome to our November uh, monthly meeting. This evening, we welcome geoarchaeologist Victoria Pagano, group manager and principal investigator with the San Antonio office of Terracon Consultants. Can we stop the presentation before I go to the whole thing?
Yeah. Hold on.
Tori
Yeah.
will discuss the archaeological work initiated in 2024 at the Crying Woman Ranch in Kerr County, an important paleo site where members of HAS have participated in excavations since 2023. Tori conducted master's degree research as part of the Ancient Southwest Texas project at Texas State University, which included excavations and archaeological analysis of the Sale Bogey alluvial terrace site in Eagle Nest Canyon, Langtree. Tori has continued to pursue outside research opportunities within geoarchaeology, GIS, and hunter-gatherer landscape use, such as with the Hill Country Archaeological Association and the Pine Ridge Pre-Ceramic Project of the Galt School of Archaeological Research. Preliminary results of geoarchaeological analysis in collaboration with Dr. Charles Frederick reveal intact stratified deposits that yield cultural materials. The relict paleo terrace preserves a unique window in the depositional and cultural formation history of the site. The work being carried out by the dedicated members of the HCAA provides a new look into the paleo archaic land use within Central Texas. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Tori Pagano. Over to you, Tori.
Thanks, Bob. So, as Bob mentioned, Victoria Pagano, I work at Terracon Consultants, but I also work alongside the HCAA Hill Country Archaeological Association crew, pursuing some geoarchaeological work at their Crying Woman Ranch site. Dr. Charles Frederick and I began geoarchaeological sampling and testing at the Crying Woman Ranch site in 2024, revealing deep, intact, stratified deposits that are yielding cultural materials. This paper today is going to introduce some of the early data and analysis from our geoarchaeological sampling, which will be used to further develop our understanding of the use and the depositional nature of the site through a natural and a cultural formation lens. So for those who are unfamiliar with the location of Crying Woman Ranch, this is a site that's is out to the west of Kerrville, along the North Fork of the Guadalupe River. It is nestled within kind of the canyons of the hill country and is nestled right up against a limestone bluff here along the North Fork. Work to date, the HCAA has been performing continuous field work investigations at Crying Woman Ranch since 2018. Work began under the late principal investigator Steve Stoudemire, and currently is being carried out under the guidance of Mr. Mike McBride, as well as many of their members that are out there almost every Monday. So continued work at the site has revealed further evidence of earth oven technology in association with Paleo-Indian occupations at the site and the advent of earth oven cooking facilities in Central Texas. The deposits of the site so far are spanning from about 10,250 cal BP to about 400 BP, and that is from archaic earth oven sites, features, and in the back of the site along the bluff, some Paleo-Indian and early archaic deposits that are on a relic paleo terrace between the river and the bluff. New excavations into layers below what is the block 2 right over here earth oven structure have yielded prospective evidence of occupations older than the previously reported 10,250 cal BP dates, including new deposits that we have captured through our geoarchaeological sampling in a far west trench that's been excavated at the back of the paleo terrace. So few photos of some of the invitational events that HCA has hosted that many folks from HAS have come out to help us with. You can see in this upper left photo, this is block 2 with a few familiar faces, and they're working on a earth oven facility, and below this earth oven facility is where we still have recovered some smaller individual features with charcoal that we believe will date below the 10,250 cal BP. Up here on the bottom left, we have the archaic middens and archaic Holocene terrace that sits in front of the Pleistocene terrace. When we look at it from the kind of like profile and the geological perspective, these are Steve Sotomayer's early geological drawings and interpretations of the Crying Woman Ranch site, and the latest Holocene modern terrace right here up against the river are mid to late Holocene terrace, and then back along the cliffs and the limestone bluff, we have this late Pleistocene, early Holocene terrace that we have our radiocarbon dates as well as lithic material, faunal material that have been recovered from the features and deposits along the bluff. If we look at this kind of like this bottom depiction, we get the cross section from A over here across to B. So we take that A at the cliffside, going down the slope, and then across to the Guadalupe River, modern Holocene terrace deposits with our mid to late Holocene terrace and late Pleistocene, early Holocene terrace deposits underlaying. And so one of the goals of the work that Charles Frederick and I have been doing is to get a better understanding of what the natural and cultural formation processes are occurring at the site. Are there deeper, potentially deeper late Pleistocene Holocene terrace deposits underneath the archaic middens and archaic deposits closer to the river? Or is the late Pleistocene, early Holocene terrace deposits along the back of the site what remains of those late Pleistocene, early Holocene terrace deposits? We're also engaging in some work so that we can get a better understanding of the depositional processes for that terrace. So when we talk about what research questions we've gone into this with, so first of all, we want to see if we can refine the occupational history of the site. Typical excavations, we're going to go with the 10 centimeter excavation level, which while it will capture some of the macro artifacts, the macro deposits, we're missing some of the finer details that make up those macro deposits. We're also looking to see if we can stratigraphically correlate the alluvial deposits and archaeological deposits across the site. So can we look at deposits that we have at one elevation and compare them to deposits that we have at another elevation. What are the differences there? Are we looking at the same soils, the same periods in time, or are there other things at play at the site? Comparing the macro assemblage, so the points, the burned rock, the macro botanicals, to a micro assemblage that is being collected out of sampling columns, which are essentially matrix samples that we are excavating out of a 50 by 50 sampling column, screening through with a wet sieve and collecting the residual material so we can pick through it to find little bits of charcoal, little bits of faunal remains, little bits of burned rock and lithic debris, and then compare those cultural materials, that micro assemblage, with the macro assemblage. We can also compare it with the sediment analysis and sediment data that we have been collecting from those matrix samples. And lastly, what can the terrace deposits tell us about the climatic and environmental conditions as the site formed? How did that change between the late Pleistocene and the early Holocene to today? And where do we have potential Paleo-Indian, late Paleo-Indian, and archaic hunter-gatherer peoples? And what was the environment that was present at that time when they were using the sites? So we'll talk first about Trench 1. So this is a deep backhoe trench that was excavated by HCAA in the spring of 2024. And as they were excavating this, they did come across, some of the macro assemblage. There are flakes, there are points, there's burned rock that is coming out. But this deep trench that's located right at the edge of the cliff slope. So in the back frame of the lower photo, we have a photo looking across the trench towards the back to the cliff face. And so what we can see is the edge of the cliff face up at the, several feet above, and then the colluvial slope, and right the trench end is right at the base of the toe of that slope. And so this is one of the highest points elevation wise of the Pleistocene terrace. And so the idea is that this is going to be kind of like the deepest, most complete sample of deposits that we might be able to capture at the site, at least for the late Pleistocene terrace deposits. While Charles and I were excavating and cleaning out the bottom of this trench, what we ended up coming across is fairly surprising. What you can see in this photo, this top photo with the north arrow, is a section of a long bone from bison. So this is a fragmented long bone, and you can see right below it are flakes from, expedient tool prep, or, whatever they were doing, if they were using it to butcher. Our goal, once we found this, was to remove it as a singular block. So that way this could be taken and analyzed by a faunal analyst. Because of the fluctuation of the water table at this location, the bone was not, it wasn't something that we could just pick out of the wall. So that was why we decided to take it out as an entire block that could be protected and kind of stabilized to be transported over to Houston for analysis by Dr. Mary Pendergrass. Her analysis did confirm that this is bison, and so this became kind of our marker as we did our excavating our sampling column to collect our matrix that we would use for our sediment analysis, but then also so we can look at the micro artifact assemblage. And so Typical excavation levels, about 10 centimeters. We go with a 5 centimeter excavation level and a 50 by 50 centimeter block that we carry from the top of the trench all the way down to the very bottom. While before we do that, we actually do, our sketches, and we try to identify areas that we think are potential occupations in the profile wall. And then we'll compare that with our data afterwards once we start doing analysis. So this was about a 3 meter deep trench, and our bone was about 260. If you can see it there on the left-hand side. And so as we were excavating the sampling column, so up here we have this 50 by 50 sampling column. In every rock that you see in that profile, we in a depositional setting like this, we are considering that as an occupation or a potential occupation that we will note within our drawings and our sketches, and then compare that once we do our micro artifact analysis. But most of the rock that you can see in this profile is burned rock. And what we have here, this is excavated down to just about the level of that bone. And Charles and I, we're down there excavating the sampling column, and we're thinking, like, good, we've captured the level with the bone. Do we want to keep going? It's wet, and we're not, and pretty cold. We weren't certain if, we'd get much more out of excavating deeper, especially with how much water was coming into the trench and just kind of starting to pool up. But we decided, okay, let's just keep going. We'll do a couple more levels. And as we did that, we actually encountered a projectile point that was sitting right in our sampling column. So, and this would have placed it almost directly below, about 10 centimeters below our bison bone and all of the debitage that was associated with it. But still, like, if we were looking at it from the profile, still would have been just right below that bone. And I believe Mike is calling that a Baker point, but I would double check with him because he's the lithics expert. So, but very clearly, a Paleo-Indian style of projectile point. So block 2 sampling. So block 2, this is our large earth oven facility. This also had several smaller earth oven and not earth oven, smaller hearth features that were have been dated. Some of them had associated like Golondrina points and St. Mary's Hall, which are fairly common at this site within these late Pleistocene deposits and early Holocene deposits. Here we have the relative dating with the lithic stratigraphy suggests about 10.2 thousand years ago to about 9,000 years ago. Excavation is ongoing here as we excavate this intact earth oven facility, and our sampling column was pulled from I don't actually have the picture up right now, from the profile adjacent to the profile in this photo. So here we have this just like remarkable earth oven facility associated with, with late Paleo-Indian points. For those who may not be as familiar with earth oven technology, this is generally considered something that is more of an archaic hunter-gatherer technology. At least that is when we really start to see that technology proliferate across Texas. And so to find something this substantial or it would represent several events, not just a singular event. and associated with Paleo-Indian associated projectile points is pretty remarkable. Excavation of this feature is being done in um, in pieces. So essentially kind of like peeling it back, not just vertically, but also horizontally, so we can kind of reveal more and more of the profile and try to capture more of the try to get a better idea of what the internal structure is of the earth oven as we move our excavations back towards the eastern wall of the excavation unit. If we look at block 2 from a macro perspective, um, this is a figure that Mike has put together and uses quite a bit in his talks about it. What we see at block 2 is an early archaic hearth. We have various FTR stacks and scatters with smaller thermal events that are occurring. We have our larger semi-intact earth oven, and then below it, to the west and kind of like to the north and south, are these smaller thermal features that were, consisted of a couple burned rocks and then some charcoal, but still assumed to be in fairly good context. And so when we look at this at the macro level, if we were to say each one of these features are defined as a occupation level, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 occupations. So approximately 6 cultural levels. So the point of Charles and I's work is to see if we can refine that just a little bit more. And we do that through sediment analysis, as well as the micro artifact analysis from doing the sampling columns. And so what we have here on the left-hand side, so this is just kind of like an illustrated sketch drawing from when we were in the field. And then our texture, particle size, so magnetic susceptibility, calcium carbonate percentage, and then our interpretation of what the depositional units are for this part of the terrace. And so what we see here is, so we have our sand over here, silt and clay. So we see an increase in sand down here, but we also have these kind of little fluctuations of sand deposits. And you can see those up here as well. And what we begin to do is take this sediment analysis and put it alongside our artifact analysis. Right now, unfortunately, we have not completed all of our micro artifact analysis on block 2. Should be up and coming, and we should be presenting that at TAS next year. But there will be more to come in the interpretation of how many cultural levels are actually present with block 2. If we look at the trench, so that deep trench, we've gone through quite a bit of the micro artifact analysis so far, but we see a similar kind of illustrated version of our sketch. We can see the varying peaks in texture in the deposits at that location. We see magnetic susceptibility with some minor peaks, but not a whole lot. We see some peaks in calcium carbonate, and then we also see some peaks in gravels. And so the big thing here that we can see is that we actually interpret the second depositional unit as being, more present here. It's thicker than what we see in block 2, and we'll get some cool perspectives on that here in a bit. So if we take our stratigraphy at that trench location and we overlay so these red lines represent peaks in our in our sediment data that could be potential shifts in deposition. And then we take our micro artifact data. So this is just our burned rock in our lithics at a greater than 1/4 inch screen. But what we can begin to do is overlay where we have these peaks in lithics, and then where we have our peaks in our macro artifact data, where we have our peaks in our sediment data, so that we can kind of have a better estimation of how many occupational levels we actually have in these deposits. Something that looks, fairly like a, fairly homogeneous, but not quite homogeneous kind of profile. But what we see is that we actually do have several different occupational levels that are present and are represented in some of the micro artifact data. And as we complete the analysis and get down to the smaller fraction, so we'll go down to a window mesh fraction, so that's smaller than 2 millimeter in size, and see what comes out of that. If we start kind of like looking at this from from the perspective of like, what does this actually look like on the landscape? What we have here is an elevation based off of LiDAR for the terrace and for the area. So back here we have our starting point at A, which is one of the older CWR unit blocks. And as we travel back to our deep trench, we had about 590 meters above sea level. We come across to block 2, slightly lower in elevation. Block 1, just a little bit lower. And then trench 3, which is a new trench that was excavated earlier this year. And then another block excavation. But what we can see is that we have a fairly continuous kind of slope down towards the east. And right here, right before A, this is actually kind of like a drainage channel almost. I think mostly artificial at this point. But if we look at it from another perspective, and we take our interpretive sketches and drawings of our depositional units side by side on this landscape, what we see is our depositional unit 2 here, dep 2 here, dep 2 here. We haven't finished work over here yet. But something pretty neat to see is that we have a fairly similar thickness so far of what we've documented in our depositional unit 1. But our depositional unit 2 does vary in thickness. And I have another kind of look at this. So we have trench 1 here. We're going to bring this all together, correlate these together. Our higher elevation has more of depositional unit 2 than our 2 lower elevations. Up here is our midden A. So this is one of the archaic earth ovens middens that have been excavated by the HCAA crew. So we can see that that is a bit higher than what we have in elevation on this late Pleistocene terrace. It's higher than our block 2, block 1. And so one of kind of like the things that we've been kind of contemplating is the height of this later or mid Holocene terrace, and this kind of like not swale but depression drainage feature between the 2 terraces, and what that means for the preservation of any Pleistocene deposits that are over here to the kind of like the northeast, and if they would actually be present under the midden A kind of mid Holocene terrace deposits, or have they been scoured out And then, this was deposited on top of it. So more questions, but we're getting a good idea of what the stratigraphy and deposits look like here on this Pleistocene terrace. Again, if we were to put our illustrated kind of sketches next to the profiles themselves, you don't really see, because of the soil development that's present at the site, a lot of the finer stratigraphy that you would expect to see in a terrace site, because there has been soil development on the site. We see profiles that look, pretty similar. We're not seeing anything that would say, hey, we have multiple occupation levels here. What we plan to do, so a lot of this work is all centered around creating these chemical and physical analyses, these data sets of the sediments, so that we can understand the periodicity and the intensity of the flood events that have resulted in the formation of the terrace deposits at CWR. Other archaeological materials and specialized samples are being collected. So we do have someone who is kind of looking at some of the macro botanical that's coming out of the earth oven deposits, but then also out of the trench residuals. So we're conducting our magnetic susceptibility, particle size, calcium carbonate. We have collected we see over here are micromorph samples, so that way we can essentially embed those soils in resin, cut them with a rock saw, create thin section slides that can be looked at under the microscope, so we can have a better idea of not just the mineralogy of the deposits, but also begin to get it helps kind of provide a better window of the what kind of bioturbation might be going on. You can capture little trails from earthworms and insects and things like that. So just kind of helps us get a better idea of what the integrity of deposits are. And at the end of the day, the plan is to bring this all back together and develop this concept of cultural units that can be defined by as different levels of human activity that are represented in the micro artifact data. And then these can be broken down into something like compound episodes, or identify things as potential episodes where maybe we do have some peaks that correlate in magnetic susceptibility and some micro artifact, but it isn't enough that we would be comfortable calling it an actual occupation. And so, in other words, so if we have this series of episodes or potential episodes that are noted, the depositional data would indicate whether that series of events was a compound episode or is a series of smaller events that were broken up by floods. We can also take, this data and dated data. So we've pulled OSL samples as well. We have radiocarbon and continue to pursue different ways of dating the deposits at the site, including looking at hackberry seed remains, like the hackberry, what are they, endocarps, I think. So the little seed casing of hackberry is datable, and many of the hackberry that we have recovered from the trench residuals are actually burned, which is pretty neat. We do need to see if that's going to affect their ability to be dated, but hopefully, given enough dates that bracket the deposits that we have on the site, we'll be able to use our dates and our sediment data to generate an age depth model. So this is using dates and estimated sedimentation rates of deposits for the site that have created these these kind of like little depositional units. And so we'll take those cultural and depositional units together And this model will be used to calculate an estimated age range for these units. So we kind of are able to generate estimated sedimentation rates, which then we compare with that cultural data. And, the goal is that we will be able to create estimated date ranges for the units themselves. And when we look at larger macro scale analyses, like our macro botanical, our zooarc, our features, we can then kind of try to see where we can integrate the micro scale analysis with the kind of macro scale analysis and see if we can make some comparisons there to correlate different events across the site, different occupational events. So taking it back a little bit to our kind of discussion about identifying occupation levels in a profile. So this is our early micro artifact analysis from the trench. So this is a fraction that is smaller than our quarter inch, and we have not completed our full column yet. But what we can see is that in this lower portion of the column so far, we have kind of our depositional units that we were identifying through our quarter inch. We have or our occupational units that we were defining through our quarter inch. Then kind of when we take our quarter inch paired with some of our sediment data, and we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Oh, sorry. Didn't mean to count the green ones. We go from, if we count our pink and our red lines, we go from 11 cultural units, and we begin to add in just this minimal, less than quarter inch data set. We get bumped up already to an estimated number of 21 cultural units that are represented in that trench in those about 275 centimeters of deposits. And so we'll continue to do this analysis, not just for the trench, but with block 2, block 1, and then trench 3. So block 1 excavations, this is where they have had the deepest excavations that have hit water table and suspected bedrock. They did also begin to see that in trench 3 before it got completely flooded in and became just like a little swimming pool. But the deepest excavation units here go to about 200 centimeters below the surface. And here, block 1, multiple thermal features. The profile itself is fairly unremarkable. And so it'll be interesting to see what it looks like once we start digging into our micro artifact analysis and our sediment analysis for this one. And then this latest trench, so this is a trench that was excavated in this spring. And you see some of your HAS folks in here from the spring invitational that HCA had following the TAS Archaeobot Academy. And you can see, so this would have been before the summer flooding and summer rains. And so you can already see how high the water table is at this location. And to actually get to bedrock here, they have put in a pump so we can actually get some good profile photos and things like that. But what's pretty remarkable is that even though this is at an elevation about a meter below trench, the other trench, we are still encountering archaeological deposits. And so what you can see there is a St. Mary's Hall. There are 3 St. Mary's Hall points that came out in one day from looking at these deposits. What we can also see is another potential earth oven facility, certainly some thermal features that are present at this location. We will be, before this gets closed up, so with the kind of rain and flooding from this past summer, decision was made that we'll just go ahead and close up and preserve these deposits and not excavate more. But before we do that, Charles and I will go out and go ahead and do some sampling columns on this as well, and make sure we get some data sets that we can use to help compare to some of the excavation work that's happened in the other parts of the terrace. Do you guys want me to do this part?
Sure.
I'm
This
sorry.
is the Pine Ridge Ceramic Project. Yeah. Yeah. Please give us a brief overview of what's going on there. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So, as Bob mentioned in the introduction, I've also been lucky enough to be out and help Mike McBride and Dr. John Lose on a project that has been named the Pine Ridge Pre-Ceramic Project, and it is an association with the Galt School. And the reason for that is that this is an area that has yielded several dozens of what are technology-wise being defined as Paleo-Indian. There are also, archaic lithics that have been recovered from this part of northwestern Belize. But what is interesting is the fusion of the technologies between lanceolate and stemmed and fluted, and so it's pretty cool. So, for just reference, the location is in northwestern Belize, just to the southeast of the Rio Hondo. This is the site in the village is located within what is called a sandy pine ridge. So essentially, the deposits are just kind of like this really pretty white sand, and they were once covered in pine forests before they were kind of deforested. Today, this area functions as a sand quarry. So kind of the economic industry for several of the folks in the village is to quarry out the sand in this area. And so they do this by digging it out with a shovel, filling dump trucks. The sand is taken. It's a really fine, nice sand, this white, kind of like this white sand that they're digging out here, which is kind of like they use it with construction projects for concrete and things like that. And so this gets sold off in trucks somewhere else. But the result of this decade, it's several decades of quarrying activity, is that this landscape is just completely pockmarked. But what has come out of it are, all of these Paleo-Indian associated archaic Maya, even lithic materials, ground stone bowls, projectile points, all sorts of different things. And the purpose of this project is to do our best to, well, one of the purposes of the project is to do our best to work with the community to help everyone understand kind of like what is present at this site, how it relates to the cultural fusion of Clovis-like technology and fishtail technology from North and South America as they come together, and so it's pretty fun. This is what we look at when we have an aerial. So we've been out there for 3 seasons now, and so we've been trying to locate intact deposits. And this year, as part of that venture, we have actually started doing geoarchaeological sampling. Dr. Mike Waters from Texas A&M University, did come down and help us with that by pulling some micromorph samples, pulling sediment samples and OSL to help us have a better understanding of the depositional processes that are going on here at August Pine Ridge. A little side quest that I have been doing while we're down there is a shovel testing regime to see if we can see any sort of spatial distribution of materials as we're um, when we're closer to some of these natural water sites. Um, what we have here is a larger, what is called a bajo, or like a larger kind of like spring-fed um, little wetland. And then we have a smaller one over here. And what you can't see from the aerials really, you can see it at different times of the year when vegetation's really kind of like higher, but that there's an interconnection between these two water sources. And so beginning to do more and more shovel testing to see if we have any sort of kind of like spatial distribution as we near kind of like these water sources and underwater connections or under subsurface water connections. Um, but these are the profiles that we're encountering out there. And so taking a geoarchaeological analysis is really taking the next step in understanding what the integrity of the deposits are, as well as understanding how these deposits are forming, because otherwise we just have a lot of materials that are kind of floating around in the sand, and we don't know how, what the integrity of those deposits are. We look at this from an elevation perspective. We have our lower kind of quarried area over here with, this is where several dozens of points have been recovered. We've not yet recovered any points in the in excavation units in context. We had a medial fragment. I think that was this year or last year. But we do recover, lots and lots of debitage that, suggests that there are it's not just use and kind of like curation of materials here, but also the manufacture of lithics and tools at this location. So more to come on that. I believe Mike McBride kind of talked some about that earlier for y'all. So just another little perspective. Yeah, and that concludes my presentation. A big thanks to you all for letting me come talk to you, and then a big thanks to Mike McBride and Dr. John Lose for kind of like just dragging me along on some of this stuff, and Charles Frederick, because Charles is always there. So
Okay, well, thank you very much, Tori. That was a wonderful two-part presentation that we got from you. That's great. We always like to hear from what's going on. I've got two questions that came up on the chat. The first one came from Frank Kozar, and it's regarding, and I remember this, the water screening that you all did at Crying Woman. It's not the most favorite thing to do, as we all know, but I wonder if you could just give us a brief overview of how you approached it.
yeah, so in this area, down, let's say we take the Pine Ridge, we have a lot of sand, we can really pass that material through a screen pretty easily. But out here, we're dealing with a lot of clays, and as we want to collect as much information from the matrix samples as possible. And so when we go to do our sampling column excavations, we take our sample for geoarchaeological analysis, for sediment analysis, but then we also, we'll essentially just fill up we'll excavate the material into the 5-gallon buckets, and then we'll add water, let that sit. If you want to start breaking down that clay a little bit more quickly, you can add some baking soda, which will help kind of break apart the clay. So that way you can, essentially we set up a like 1/4-inch screen, and then we have nested sieves, geologic sieves that will capture, different levels of micro artifacts. So we have a 1/4 inch, and then we'll do like a window mesh. And as that material goes through those sieves, once we have our clean residuals on each level, we'll go ahead and bag that into chiffon, like fabric, like that really kind of like thin material. We'll bag that up and dry that out, and then go through and sort those materials just like with, by hand, with tweezers and stuff.
Another question also about Crying Woman, from Jeff Mills. Is there any idea of how long uh, any of the levels were actually occupied? Just some general idea.
So, to
Not the
one of
overall,
the
but for individual levels, is there any more detail?
Yeah, so to date individual levels, of course you can always, like, if you find a piece of charcoal, you can associate a date to it. One of the goals of our work is to create that depositional model, the sedimentation rates, which will kind of allow us to have this conceptual um, idea of when cultural units, like what the date ranges are for the cultural units. We won't be able to like put a exact date on like when they were using it. We can try to refine how many kind of cultural units might be present there, or episodes that make up a cultural unit, and then put a date range on that.
Okay. Okay. Well, unless there's any more questions, I'd like to thank Tori for joining us this evening. Um, it's been great. I hope you can tell us a lot more in the near future. And I hope everyone has a very pleasant evening. Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
Bye,
you.
Bob.
guys.